Hello everybody, my name's James, and for the benefit of those listening back to the audio podcast, you're listening to Ask James, my regular YouTube live stream, where I welcome questions from the YouTube community. A little bit later than normal, it's to timestamp this, it is 5 past 6 p.m. on Friday, July 26th. I've been on dad duty while my other half's been working today, and she's now finished work, so my work can begin. This is the last bit of public content before correspondent week begins on Monday, August the 5th. 20 podcasts for you in 5 days. One podcast on each Premier League club with our designated correspondence. Before I get into the questions, just a couple of little bits of housekeeping from me. Won't keep you for too long. Firstly, as pointed out by someone yesterday on Twitter/X, why didn't me and Clayton mention Alejandro Garnacho when we spoke about 6.5 million midfielders on Wednesday's podcast? The answer to that is I have no bloody idea why we overlooked discussing Alejandro Garnacho. It wasn't done intentionally. There certainly was, particularly for me, an intention to talk about him. I can't give you a good explanation. So if somebody was listening to that and thinking, oh Jesus, he doesn't rate Garnacho at all, that is not the case, because Alejandro Garnacho is right under consideration for me potentially to start with for the start of the season. Just cover off another question I'm regularly getting in my DMs at the moment, which I'm very thankful for that question in my DMs, by the way. When can we support you again on Patreon for people who want to join? You'll be able to sign up and support us on Patreon from Tuesday, July the 30th. That will reopen. There's a block on new joinees at the moment. Unfortunately, the reason for that is we gave our patrons a month free, and that was promised to them. Unbeknownst to us, Patreon have changed their terms and conditions where if you offer a month free, you can't accept any new patrons at the same time. So that's why no one's been able to join up. You will be able to join up from Tuesday. At the end of this stream/audio, I will discuss Patreon content and what we got planned in the schedule in a little bit more detail. Right, let's get into the questions. Jamie Anthony is first. Says, hi James, really enjoyed the new show you did with Clayton this week, looking forward to more of it. Good, I'm glad. I think we've had some really positive feedback from it. We wanted a really relaxed vibe, kind of talking about current football topics. There's a few more things that I'd like to include in it as kind of designated themes within that podcast that we intentionally left out of this pilot episode. So it won't be around for a couple of weeks. Obviously, as I said, I'm going to be off the next week. Then it's correspondent week. Then there's a really hard-hitting week of full FPL content, which again I'll go into it at the end of the stream. But I imagine, therefore, so August the 21st, most likely, and it will become a regular part of our schedule from there. That's the intention, because the feedback's been pretty positive. So I'm glad most of you enjoyed it. King of Mandalore said, should having Nkunku affect your decision on which semi-premium midfielder to have? I feel like picking Saka Foden for coverage might be better, although Palmer's fixtures are so tempting. Yeah, look, it goes for everything in terms of answering the questions at the moment. Play it your way is a given. Remember, we've all got the same amount of money and all the same decisions to make. It does feel like there's a strong movement at the moment to have one of Palmer or Nkunku, certainly on what I'm seeing on socials. Not seeing too many teams with both, and I think the fact that Manchester City is the first fixture is a little bit off-putting. Do you want to look at Palmer and Nkunku in that first fixture? So you could start with both. Of course you can. That's going to possibly save you transfers down the line, because from game week 2, that run obviously basically until they go to Anfield in game week 8 is a really good strong run from game week 2 to 7. So I wouldn't be against people starting with both, but I also accept your thinking of kind of spreading where your money's going to be at. I think with Saka, Foden, Palmer as well, it's obviously really important to see how they integrate back in with their teams in the build up to game week 1. I don't think there's a necessity for Arsenal to have to use Saka in game week 1. I don't think there's a necessity for Manchester City to use Phil Foden. I recall going into the season after the last Euros, where Guardiola took his team to Tottenham and lost on the opening day, which was also the Sunday late afternoon kickoff. and he didn't pick all of his big hitters. Kevin De Bruyne was the substitute, for example. There's no guarantee like a Foden's going to play in game week 1. So I think there's a real relevance to that. Also, there's a relevance by which of the premium players you're picking. So if you were to go with Haaland, your probably requirement for Foden feels less by virtue of that as well. If you're going with Havertz or Odegaard, you'll feel like you have some Arsenal coverage. But I think Nkunku should be a standalone decision, not based on what you're going with others. Like if you're going with Palmer, I just think Nkunku is just an individual decision, and I wouldn't I've got Palmer, so I won't have Nkunku. If you decide Palmer is the best out of him, Saka, Foden, and that's your one, and you also come to the same conclusion that Nkunku's the best at around about 6.5, then have them both, mate. Nicholas says, hi James, wildcard in game week 4 is on my mind as it allows us to steam into Brighton, Villa, Liverpool, Chelsea, for example. Focus on teams like Arsenal, Nottingham Forest, Newcastle for the first 3. What do you think? Thanks for the great content. So I think plans from there would be your timing of that. You probably still want some Manchester City because they've got Brentford at home, but then they've got Arsenal at home and Newcastle away, which as a home fixture and away fixture is near enough as difficult as it can get in terms of consecutive fixtures. We know we should assess City slightly differently to how we assess other teams, and they can still return well in said games. But I'd also think Liverpool and Chelsea are still in the middle of their good runs. Like, you're going to attack Liverpool early on, that's fine. Same applies to Villa. Are you saying steam into those teams in game week 4? Okay, but Liverpool's great from the start. Chelsea's great from 2, basically. Villa's great from 3. Brighton have basically a good 2-game run from game week 4 and 5 against Nottingham Forest, and I think it's Ipswich they have in Ipswich 4 and Nottingham Forest game week 5, then a more difficult run again. And I think when you get to game week 6, right, I'm going to move on my Brighton assets, you're going to find you want to go back into Arsenal, I think. So lots of different ways to do it, quite clearly. 4 wouldn't be top of my agenda at the moment. I've seen lots mentioning 3 as a potential, because I think you flip into Villa there, and arguably some would make the case that's the start of Chelsea's good run, perhaps not including the fixture at Wolves in game week 2. You can make your narratives for pretty much any week to make your reasons. I saw someone the other day sort of saying game week 16 was a really good switch near a late on. And I don't disagree with that. When you look at the fixture in game week 16, it is everyone has a kind of a bad, all the top teams have bad fixtures before that, then a really good 16. But a lot of them then have a difficult 17 as well. They're never good at 18. So I think you can always spin your narratives to how you want. 4 wouldn't be top of my agenda. I mean, look, you're saying Arsenal, Forest, Newcastle for the first 3. Still, Newcastle got Wolves, Fulham 4, 5. It's all right. And other than City in 6, you'd make a case Newcastle's run goes on longer. Everton away, Brighton at home isn't particularly scary. Narratives. Zane FX says, thoughts on how far you think Ange can take Spurs? You've had 2 world-class managers, Poch and Jose. To be honest, I was expecting you to say Conte in there, and got to a Champions League final. Can Ange do better? Patron top tier member here. Loved the content. It's very much appreciated, mate. Thank you. My ambition for Ange Postecoglou is for him to win the Premier League title with Tottenham. For clarity, not this season. Although, as I've said to others, I think that will probably be Ange's target himself this year. It's an unrealistic target, but ultimately, whether that's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years from now, that has to be the target. Do I believe he can achieve that? Yes, I do, actually. Yes, I do. And I think a big reason for that is this amazing group of young players that we have at the moment, which gives us the best opportunity of competing with the best teams that are around us that have, to be honest, more power in terms of their financial capabilities, let's say. Although I think Tottenham are leaning towards having those capabilities, but aren't quite sure how they want to deal with it. I think it's worth saying. I think it's a narrative that might come about in the next couple of years when the Tottenham going to go 80, 90 million for a player. There's a real reluctance at the moment where I think the majority of the other clubs have kind of hit that point now. But yeah, my ambition for Ange would be to win the league. And I'm happy for Ange to take as long as that takes. Love him as a leader of the team. Love the way his team plays. I think he's missing some really big components to meet that target, particularly in the attacking positions. So I'm still chill and very happy with Ange. Last year, it was kind of free pass, right? It was no target because beforehand it was win, win, win. It's like, okay, we're changing the style. There's no target. The target this year has to be to obviously try and get back into the Champions League. Owen Wilson says, hi James, how many Game Week 1 Spurs results can you name in a row? Starting with last season and going backwards. Can I do it the other way? Going backwards. Oh, jeez. Right, so 2-2 at Brentford last year. Year before, 4-1 at home against Southampton. Year before, 1-0 against Man City. COVID season, lost 1-0 at home to Everton. That's Jose's first full... Thankfully, he only had one full season, didn't he? Season before... Maurizio Pochettino. Shit. After the Champions League final, beat Villa 3-1 opening day. 18-19. The shitty blue trim at the bottom. 1-2-1 at Newcastle. Year before, 2-0 at Newcastle. This is terrible for the audio, sorry, but you might think it's fun. 15, I've missed one here. 16-17 is 1-1 at Everton. 15-16s with the trim, lost 1-0 at Manchester United. 14-15, 1-0 at West Ham. 95th minute winner from Eric Dyer. You can see me in the celebrations behind the goal on the Trevor Brookian stand. 13-14, oh God, that was... fairly disastrous. 1-0 at Crystal Palace. This is a period where I used to drink a lot more now. 12-13. It's still under AVB, isn't it? Crap. 12-13. All in white, James. You were all in white. Were we at home? Was that? That's not Newcastle away as well, is it? No. Is it? Yes. Yes, it is. Lost 2-1 at Newcastle opening day. 11-12. So many people have logged off at this point. 11-12. Shit. Harry's last season. Meant to play Everton but didn't because of the riots. Lost 3-0 at Manchester United in game week 2. 10-11. 0-0 against Manchester City. 9-10. Beat Liverpool 2-1. Can I stop now? I think you get the idea. I'll get through all of them, mate. Rishi Patel says, thoughts on Barnes over Gordon. Who's more essential, Haaland or Salah? Thoughts on Barnes over Gordon. Who's more essential, Haaland or Salah? We don't have the essential. Here's what I would say. I'm more likely to start with Salah and Haaland. I don't foresee me not starting with Mo Salah, personally. Haaland, I'm largely prepared potentially to take on. But I think, like many, the closer it gets, the more you can... And we're going to do a podcast probably on the 14th of August on captaincy. In fact, I say probably. I know that will be part of a podcast on the 14th of August. And the more you look at that, and I can tell you the spoiler for that now is shit, Erling Haaland. Once you start really breaking it down, there's a massive period from circa game week 7 that basically goes up to around about game week 25, and it's only like about 2 or 3 times. I think he's not best, and the more shit, man. But it's what you can have as combinations, isn't it? Like Isak and Watkins together is 2.5 million more than Haaland. Like that's mad. That's mad. Just got to think of it like that. But it's the captaincy, isn't it? Changed the narrative. But I'm more likely to start with Salah. I think it probably means Phil Foden will be a really prominent player for me, so that I've got the coverage of a Manchester City captaincy option. Not from the start, by the way. I don't see me starting with him. But he might be a player that I go straight into, possibly from sort of game week 2. So preferences with Salah over Haaland for me. On Barnes over Gordon, I'm really keen on kind of pre-season. So Newcastle play 2 back-to-back home games in consecutive days the weekend before the season starts, which I think is quite important. One of the problems that we've got for correspondent week is I think a lot of the English players won't have come back and played by the time we record those podcasts. It's just how it is. So questions like that are going to remain a little bit up in the air. But there has to be a possibility that Harvey Barnes looks great in pre-season, Anthony Gordon just comes back and plays. Has to be a possibility. And I don't know how, unless we got something in that penultimate weekend that was like, look, he set him up with Barnes on the left, on Gordon at 10 or Gordon on the right or something like that, that made us think that they were both going to play. I couldn't see me wanting to go down the Harvey Barnes route. I really want to keep an eye on him. I think that could be absolutely gold at 6.5. But I'd almost need to see Barnes and Gordon play together to be able to go for him, I think. Adam says, hey James, what are your thoughts on the Spurs double up start the season considering Son and Maddison? I think you're probably on short-term thinking there because of Tottenham's fixtures in game week 3 and 4. You're not going to want to look at both of them. You may well be looking at game week 3 wildcard. I totally get, if you're on that strategy, why Tottenham would really appeal with those first 2 fixtures of Leicester away and Everton at home. James Maddison is no consideration for me unless I see something very different next couple of weeks pre-season. Absolutely not interested. I'd rather take a chance on Brennan Johnson even with less security of starts. I think he'll prove to be the better option. Sonny, I would really, really want if I came to a formal conclusion that I didn't have Haaland or Salah. Because that would give me kind of a really strong, obviously, Tottenham captaincy coverage. You could understand then that I'd end up in a scenario where it's like Isak, Watkins, Son, and 2 from Foden, Palmer, Saka. I mean, that'd probably be Foden, Saka because of Nkunku, actually. And honestly, when you put that together, when you put a draft together that doesn't have Haaland or Salah in, you'll find it will look great. The captaincy is a huge hole in the theory of obviously having neither. James Maddison is, like I said, unless I see something different in pre-season, which, by the way, the next time you hear from me, I may well do because there's 3 Tottenham games between now and then. So I might see something, yeah, James Maddison's really on it in pre-season. I need to see that change of form in him or he's just no consideration for me. My opinion is he will not score enough goals. Whereas Brennan Johnson, I think, will. Jim Pro 100 says, hi James, will you be playing Ian FF Stuff's Cloud Fantasy Football format? Shout out to those 2 lads because they've done something absolutely phenomenal. I know they've done a lot of hard work behind the scenes, and I reckon anybody go and check out what they're doing who played Sky last year. Yes, I will enter a team, highly likely, which, to be fair, I had said to Ian that I probably wouldn't when he first told me about the idea, but I recommend everyone gets behind it and gives it a go. It's not going to be Sky's Sky, but the work that Ian and the genius of FF Stuff mean that there's something there where the guys have put something together where the pricing is going to be extremely different because it's taken from the Telegraph game. But the guys have put something together that is as close as can possibly done to replicate the Sky game under the short-term availability from Sky's cancellation of the game. So that hat off massively to those 2 lads. Yes, I will almost definitely, and I'm going to play Telegraph this year, so I'm sure I can spare one of my 5 teams for that. Sean says, evening James, nice to be back. Any early thoughts on when you may look to use your first wildcard this time? Yeah, there is. I'll tell you the 2 most likely options for me right now. And no decision has been made, none at all. But the 2 most likely for me at the moment are game week 2 and game week 18. And you could barely get further away, right? The second available week and the penultimate available week for the first usage of it. So, yeah, I'm very 50-50 on bench boosting in game week 1 is my thinking at the moment. Then I'm looking at wildcard 2. That wildcard in 2 doesn't necessarily include Erling Haaland. It is something I'm looking at because I just, no one's going to do that. And my goal is to finish first. I know that's impossible, but I'm gonna have a go, right? You're not just going to do it by just doing the same thing as everybody else. And if it explodes and it goes wrong, then it explodes and goes wrong. That's preferred option at the moment. Otherwise, my preferred option is to wait right till the end. And then I'm really going with more consistent players. So, you likes of Watkins, maybe even looking at holding people like, Jared Bowen through good and bad fixtures. There's a group of fixtures, as kind of covered on Monday's podcast, where the big clubs, let's say from the top 8, bar Manchester United, all have a really difficult run together. And I think if I wait for 18, it just means mass patience of holding those players through that. And largely trying to switch off and not make transfers over that period. In the build-up to them, that wildcard, hit something really short-term, come back out of it till the other side of January and attack with transfers in hand again. Or even keep storing them all the way towards 33, 34. But then that's when the second wildcard's probably going to be, is around about that point. So that's the thinking at the moment. I know plenty are looking at 3. Game week 4 has been mentioned. I think the likes of game week 7, sort of after Manchester City's difficult fixture of Arsenal Newcastle. For Arsenal, it spins in game week 6. It spins for different teams at different times. Game week 8 obviously gets kind of really bad for Chelsea, for example. So I think beyond game week 8, I don't like. During the course of that podcast recording with Suj on Monday, I was of the opinion that sort of 1 to 10 and then no, and then maybe like a 4-week gap where I just can't see wildcards getting played. Then from 14 onwards, you can kind of look again. I'm now of the opinion that's probably game weeks 1 to 8, and that period's longer, where sort of 9 to 14 or so is just a no-go zone for wildcarding, I think, basically. Unless you really want to steam into your Everton's, your Brentford's, your West Ham's, and you can do. There's plenty of talisman in there with the likes of Bowen, Kudus, Boomo, etc. Who's next? Sean also says, non-FPL, how do you think United will fare this time? Seems to me like they're starting to operate like a proper club again in the market, with more outgoings and incomings on the cards. Yeah, look, certainly Manchester United look like, I think that's a spot-on comment, behaving like a proper club again. The amount of stuff that appears to be going on with sort of coaching staff, little things like I'd seen this morning, they're looking to appoint a set piece coach. There's little things like that look like they're going on. I do wonder if that's towards a little bit of a potential evolution, though, where if it starts bad for Ten Hag, they're like, yep, that's enough. And I do suspect that might still happen. I think it's possible this season that Manchester United have a terrible start and change their manager and still sort of finish 4th. Like, that can happen. That happened with Tottenham in 21-22 as an example. I don't foresee Manchester United as it is really being in the hunt for 4th. But as said previously, 5th might be enough for Champions League this year. And I don't think that's certainly not out of reach of any of the top 8, at least. But I have nagging concerns. If Martinez and Yoro can play regularly together and hit off a really good partnership, that will make a dramatic change to United's ability, and certainly not going to give up as many chances as they have done. So yeah, I can understand the cautious optimism that United fans have at the moment. I feel like Martinez's fitness is pretty key. Mustafa Qureshi says, hi James, I'm seeing a shift on X towards no Salah, mostly because we haven't seen him under Slot. I haven't seen this trend for Trent. Is that slightly illogical? Shouldn't the whole team get worse? Shouldn't the whole team get worse? I mean, the whole team might get better, mate. You are working into the unknown. I mean, this is interesting. Do you want to have that narrative around the likes of Nkunku and Palmer at the moment for similar reasons? Are you going to, if João Pedro's fit, are you going to discount him because it's a new manager, etc.? With Mo, the one interesting thing about Mo versus the rest is he's a near certain starter in game week 1, isn't he? Because he's the only forward there at the moment. All the rest are going to come back late. It's like unthinkable that Mo Salah wouldn't play those first 3 games because he's going to be so far ahead of everybody else on fitness. So again, I think you can make your narrative completely different and switch it. Maybe even Salah's expected minutes over those first 3 game weeks should even maybe be higher than what they'd ordinarily be over a 3-week period. Is it unthinkable that Mo Salah would play 250, 260 minutes over that period, where perhaps the expected minutes would normally be, I don't know, perhaps 20 or 30 under that for a 3 game week period ordinarily. So I think you could spin that narrative the other way. I wouldn't take too much notice of what happens on X. Remember, everyone's got their narratives to suit their own means and needs, right? Getty FPL says, hello James, what's your thoughts on no Haaland start the season? Is it worth the risk, or build a team with Salah, Haaland and Trent? If I had Salah and Haaland, I can't see me putting Trent in there as well, mate. I think that would rule Trent out if I was to have both, I think. I was going to say Robertson is a possible, he may even have an injury now as well, isn't he? I think he's ruled out for sort of circa 2.5 to 3 weeks. He's going to be borderline for game week 1. So look, with Tsimikas and Gomez, you're probably ruling him out from FPL selection at this moment, unless he was sort of played an hour or so on the penultimate weekend, maybe. Look, thoughts for me at the moment, I've already said, so I'm not going to cover again, is it's more likely no Haaland for me. But don't be surprised. I'm not making any promises on this, outlandish. Why I'm not going with Haaland? Like, that decision isn't definitive. I'm not going to be a complete idiot. I mean, to be honest, the biggest thing that would maybe influence Haaland actually isn't Salah for me. I'm very comfortable captaining Alexander Isak in game week 1. Probably game week 3 as well, and then going Salah 2-4. So actually, ironically, Isak is possibly the one that's the biggest impact towards Haaland for me. There's not a lot of forwards I like in game week 1 specifically. Isak and Havertz are the two. I'm not overly. There's good options. Don't get me wrong. Like Watkins is still fine. Chris Wood, if we think he's going to start for Forest. Richarlison, if we think he's going to start for Tottenham. We don't think he's going to be involved this weekend, but he has travelled on tour. He needs to get up to fitness quickly, or he's not going to be starting game week 1, in which case Son will start that position. I'm not in love with the... I mean, ironically, Wood and Solanke, maybe even from the same fixture. Didn't one of reviews, and forgive me if I'm misquoted here, but didn't one of reviews 3 posts include Calvert-Lewin maybe as an option at the start? Don't love that personally. So I'm not in love with me in the forwards game week 1, so I think Isak's going to have a big bearing. Him staying fit is going to have a big bearing on Haaland. If Isak got ruled out, it's a wild rethink for me, I think. Swiss Wavy says, Brighton opening 3 fixtures at tough. How much would their chaos confuse the opposition? I think there'll be a little bit of adjustment to clubs getting used to Brighton. It's worth saying that without the ball, they really will funnel into a 5-4-1 and be more difficult to break down than I think what they were under Roberto De Zerbi. They're going to be very interested in what they do on the ball. Yes, that is going to cause some confusion, some overloads. I think midfield players particularly are going to find it really hard work playing against Brighton. It's a shame for Brighton. I think their fixture run the first 8 is pretty rough, isn't it? 4 and 5 is good, but the first 3 and then the 3 after 4 and 5 is the 6 out of the 8 are tough. Even Everton opening days, it's not easy going to Goodison opening day. You get proper atmosphere there. How will it cause chaos? It might. It might, but they might also get exploited. Owen Wilson says, adding to that, what would your top 3 6.5 mids be right now? Okay, well, I can tell you again, why did I not mention Garnacho the other day? Because I think Nkunku and Garnacho are the top 2 for me. I think the third for me at the moment is probably Brennan Johnson. If I think he's going to start game week 1, I'm really interested in that as a little maybe two week thing, or obviously under my possible idea of bench boost in game week 1. Yeah, I've got to be really confident that he's going to start though if I go down that route. So I think Nkunku, Garnacho, Johnson. I think that order. Oni Dozy says, hi James, with Hall and Livramento, do you think England's fullback positions are sorted for the next decade? I know that's asked from a Newcastle fan perspective. Long way to go for Lewis Hall particularly. I think Tino Livramento certainly is one that people expect to progress, but Lewis Hall, if he's going to be a left back, by virtue of the fact we don't have many great left backs, he's obviously going to be someone who will quickly come under consideration for England, no doubt about that. Murphy says, would you prioritise Trent or Gordon? I'm currently focused on the latter with a range of 4.5 defenders better than that of the 5 million mids. Yeah, I think you've probably answered your own question there, Murphy. I did a piece for our patrons yesterday where I looked at several different drafts. You know, kind of a favoured, and to be honest, a lot of it's in the bin now because actually Andy Robertson was quite a part of it, and that's got to go now. And I haven't looked at my team since. But there were, whether I looked at sort of just Salah or just Haaland or Haaland and Salah together or neither, there were 3 starting constants in my drafts, and those were Isak, Gordon, and Porro. Those were the 3 constants for me that didn't move at all. So I think on that basis, like, I just need to see Anthony Gordon get minutes on that penultimate weekend, and then if that's the case, I'm happy. And I will highly likely go with him. Omar El Maradri, sorry if I mispronounced that, says I'm fairly set on many players, but I'm stuck between Haaland and Jota versus Salah and Watkins. Thoughts? I mean, at the moment, Salah and Watkins for me fairly clear, and that's also saving you transfers. You're saving you transfers, I think, because you're not going to want to move Mo up to a sort of at least, I think, sort of game week 7 when Manchester City then come back into a good run, and Watkins is going to be similar. So you're ahead of a curve where you got to think those who don't have Watkins, because that ownership's really high, are probably going to want to go there in game week 3. I'm seeing lots of, to give you an idea here, start with Son and a cheaper forward, downgrade Son into sort of the 6.5, 6 range once you know looks really strong there, perhaps Lycan and Kunku, and then the third forward up to Watkins. I'm seeing that as and we kind of covered that as the real one in game week 3 actually, sort of like moving Tottenham into Aston Villa was one of the earliest swings of the season of clubs that would have similarly priced players. Obviously in the case of Son and Watkins, they're different positions, so it may need the 2 transfers. And I know people want to keep rolling transfers this year, maybe. But for me, that would be comfortable. Salah, Watkins at this minute, can't make a case for any Liverpool attacker other than Salah, or maybe there might be an argument on what we see over the next 10 days or so, possibly for Szoboszlai. I'd really struggle on Jota, Nunez, Diaz, and Gakpo because we're all going to be coming back so late. There's going to be so little information off a new manager. If it was Klopp sitting here, okay, I understand what happens here with Klopp. I don't know who's going to favour. Be guessing at the moment. Greg Frost says, if Ahmad scores early Sunday morning, would you consider him as an 8th attacker, likely to get minutes off the bench every game at least? I've seen him, spoiler maybe, I've seen our Man United correspondent Gary Robinson's been knocking about with a draft on our Slack for our patrons, and Ahmad is in it. So make of that what you will. He's not on a real consideration list for me at this moment. That said, it became clear for me this time last year on Garnacho, and that was one of the things that really influenced me bench boosting in 1. So let's see. Luis Bonilla says, question James, is Konate and Timber nailed start for Liverpool and Arsenal? Nope. I mean, Arsenal are going to be completing the sign of Calafiori, so he can obviously play centre back, left back, central midfield, I believe as well. Not that I've seen him play that position. So no, you couldn't say that about Timber. And Konate is obviously in competition with Jarrell Quansah and possibly Joe Gomez maybe as well. Plus Vandenberg is back, who's had some loans as well. Again, manager might like him, so no, you can't say that for those 2 players, mate. Guy Rimmer says, which Spurs assets, if any, would you pick for game week 1 only? He's looking at the bench boost 1, wildcard 2 strategy. So I'll tell you players that would be under consideration for me on that basis. Vicario, Porro, Udogie, Johnson, Son. Those would be the ones under consideration. And if I got something that made me think that Lucas Bergvall was an assured starter, you'd have to add him to that list. It's possible if I bench boost 1, I might end up with double Spurs defence, which I think would most likely be Porro and Udogie, and just attack it. Hemdog says, how do you see Club World Cup 2025 being received by fans with it being moved to the end of the season? How do you think clubs will approach it? Feels like a bit of a cluster, but would love your thoughts. I'm going to skip that, Hemdog. It's a really good question, thank you. But obviously me and Clayton did cover that in quite a bit of detail on Wednesday's podcast. If you have a look at the timestamps, you'll find where that is at sort of 35 minutes or so, I think. But if you go to the video, you'll see on the timestamps when we talk about it. So I'd refer you back to Wednesday's pod. Joe Finley Batter says, reckon your pod on security at football might be coming soon after recent events. We're definitely going to do it, Joe. It probably is one that's possibly going to land on Patreon. I know you were in St Etienne, wasn't it, at the Olympic game the other day. Suja's got some really strong feelings, which the more he talks to me about it, the more I feel like it's not something we should put public. Let me send it to you like that. So, yeah, Suji's not happy. And he's also looking at it from afar. And I get it. I get it. I'm really concerned that something really bad's going to happen soon. Yeah. Let's leave it there for the minute, Joe. We'll get there. We'll get there, no doubt. Heather says, hi, James. Hope you and the family are good. And to you too, Heather says, thoughts on Minter at Brighton and him as an FPL pick? Thanks. Yeah, one very much to keep an eye on. I referenced, we covered him a little bit on the podcast yesterday, Heather, where we spoke about new signings that we're not too familiar with or hadn't seen play. I think he fell into that category for me and Clayton. So he was one of the ones, sort of 11 players or so we spoke about yesterday. And of those 11 players, I'd say he's the most interesting one from a fantasy perspective. Eyes on very much. I mentioned that I could see a train of thought where people went with someone like Hudson-Odoi for 1 to 3, and then into Minter game week 4. Into Minter. That's a Sunday League team if ever I've heard one. Look at signing him perhaps in game week 4. But I'd recommend having a little listen back to that one yesterday. Yes, certainly be keeping an eye. I think if I was to start with someone in that 5.5 bracket, I probably would still just go Hudson-Odoi at the start, I think. FPL SWAT says, hi, James. Looking forward to another season of Planet FPL, mate. Loving your work as always. Favourite in the 5.5 million to 7 bracket. Okay, done over there, and I mean, there's so many at the 6.5, which obviously we covered on Wednesday, and I already gave my favourite 3 at that price bracket. I'm going to have to remind myself, to tell you the truth, of all the players at 6 and 7 specifically. As just said, I think the 5.5 midfielders, I think Hudson-Odoi is still the preference. So from the 7s, I think Bumo personally from that list. Consistent. I think the off-putter on him would be 2, 4, 5 is quite ugly, but he's a player for me again on that potential Wildcard 2 strategy. I'd potentially like in game week 1 who will be 7.4% owned. It's kind of a FPL community favourite, and that ownership's really low. It's really low because of the fixtures and possibly Toney's return. But remember, Toney might go. You've got Thiago we spoke about yesterday. He's picked up a knee injury, so he might be unavailable for a bit. So yeah, I think Bumo from the 7 million ones would be my favourite, and take him as a potential consistency animal. From the 6 millions, I think I'd really surprise you and say Keenan Dewsbury Hall. I think that we haven't seen it yet for Chelsea. Where he plays might be fascinating and might really surprise people. I don't really like any of them 6s. What you got? Dewsbury Hall, Gallagher, Anthony, Almiron, Joel Linton, Paquetá. I mean, from that 6, I mean, I couldn't make a podcast out of those 6 players. It'd be Dewsbury Hall, but not in love with any of them. There's a lot of 6.5 options. Shani Razzle says, Big James, wishing you and yours a lovely summer. Thank you. You too, pal. Says, usual request 1, ask these freeloaders to exercise their thumb and hit a like. Yes, freeloaders. Activate your thumb and hit the like, or if you're listening to the audio, 5-star rating and a review goes a really, really long way. 2, please rub that noggin for good luck from the FPL gods. There you go. It's rubbed. Andrew Jarvis says, hello, mate. Hope you're well. Is it a good idea to start the FPL season game 1 with some money in the bank? In previous seasons, it's been worth holding 0.5 in the bank for price fluctuations. If that's what you thought in previous seasons, I'd probably just have to ask you and say, well, why do you think that's not the case this season? What's different about this season that means it wouldn't be important this season? Here's a very simplistic, right? you've got all them 6.5 million midfielders. What is it, about 20? Right. One of them is going to be 6.6 going into game week 2. At least. At least. And the chances are it might be the one you want to go and buy. Like if Christopher Nkunku plays number 9 against Manchester City and scores, he ain't going to be 6.5 going into game week 2. Okay? If you don't start with him, so is that where you want your 0.5 for, Andrew? Or are you prepared to go early? In the benefit with Nkunku, you won't need to because the game's not till the Sunday, so at least you're not making the transfer till at least all the game week 1 fixtures bar Tottenham's finish. It won't take much, particularly for that. Like Nkunku is an obvious one. Oh shit. Oh, okay, and the fixtures are brilliant for next week. Oh, okay, right, yeah, that's the one you can see flying. But there's a lot that are more likely to drop as well and hit the 6.4. So all I'd really say back to you, Andrew, if you always thought it was important in the past, I don't see any reason why that's any different now. Owen Wilson says, unreal Spurs knowledge, apologies to listeners if that was boring. You know I could have gone all the way there, mate. But it's the umming and ahhing doesn't help. Horia Grajdan says, hi James, do you think that a YouTube channel for just banter on FPL and Premier League would go well this season? Yeah, start your channel, right? You got all my blessings. I think they exist out there. Perhaps just haven't found them yet. Sockhan1 says, best set and forget enablers. Cheers for the golden fixture episode. You're very welcome, mate. Set and forget enablers. Jeez. You are heavily influenced by the fixtures. I think, the 4s, I think it probably is Harwood Bellis at the moment, but that needs a real kind of cautious eye on the sort of transfers. I think sort of like Southampton, Ipswich, Leicester are making, for example, particularly those 3 clubs for 4.0. 4.5s, I have a real inkling that Lewis Dunk is a real one to avoid. I speak about it with Sam on Correspondent Week. I just got an inkling that Hudson might not like him. I've got an inkling on that. And that might be really wide of the mark, by the way. But I think with Dunk's one who falls into your eye, he'll play every week. I'm just a little cautious of that. Concert returns low. I mean, look at Joachim Anderson's ownership at the moment. What is that all about? I'm not seeing him in many teams, but the ownership's really high. I don't know if it's because he started really well last year. Maybe it's the highest scoring 4.5 from last year. I'm not sure. I'd prefer to go with Mark Gay, personally. So I think Mark Gay, and also he could transfer to a team that he walks into largely. So them at the 4.5 region. I'm not massively interested in United guys, but one of Euro or Martinez might show themselves. But then I think similar to, why not Mickey van der Ven then, for example, at Tottenham for similar reasons, basically. One of the cheap Chelsea guys will show up. It's very difficult to say which one at this moment in time. Midfielders, Harry Winks, I see, has crept over 10% ownership. I mean, if that's your thing and you want your 2-pointers, love Winksy, former Tottenham player. Like, good luck if that's what you want, your 4.5 million midfielder. If I'm going long, if I decide that I'm wildcard in 18, or that's my principal idea at least, that obviously could change, then I think I would start with Bergvall. Yeah, that's genuinely how I feel. Morgan Rogers is the one to really watch. I think it's sort of 5 million from Villa. Forwards, I think it's I sneaky that it's Armstrong rather than João Pedro at 5.5. And I think Southampton's fixtures are quite nicely hidden by the Newcastle away game, right? That's a good run afterwards. Forest at home, Brentford away, United at home, Ipswich at home, Bournemouth away, Arsenal away, not great, and Leicester at home. That's a really good run after the Newcastle game. So I think Adam Armstrong's possibly the hidden one at sort of 5.5-ish. Chris Wood at 6. I know people are going to potentially look at and like, but you couldn't call that a longer term decision. Daniel Cullerton says, what were your thoughts of Peter Crouch as a player? Was he loved at Spurs? Very much one of them, I think, as time's been on his side. Some people leave the club and then you watch videos back and you, wow, they were good, and you forget how good they were. Crouchy's become sort of mystique legend at Tottenham, when I think largely most people, I would say, didn't like him when he was there. But he was kind of anti, if you think of what was behind him in the likes of Bale, Modric, Van der Vaart, Lennon, some obscene talent, and then Crouchy's at the front of that. I think there was, Crouchy used to frustrate quite a lot. But Crouchy scored two of the most iconic goals in Tottenham's history, which is why it's remembered so well. The goal at Manchester City that got us in the Champions League for the first time, and then the winner against AC Milan in the San Siro in that Champions League season that followed as well, in two very kind of anti-Tottenham 1-0 away wins, although they were both deserved, particularly that Manchester City game. We were brilliant that night. We played some super stuff. So on that, he's scorer of two of Tottenham's most iconic goals ever. So I think he's remembered extremely fondly because of that. And people forget the bits they didn't like. Daniel also says, do you think the new Roll 5 transfers will help players like yourself that like to forward plan? I don't know if we can answer this till the end, right? I think there's people who have this school of thought that it will help players be able to kind of switch off and almost preset and say, right, I'm going to let it be what it is, and I want to use free transfers in that week, in a couple of weeks' time and stuff like that. Yes, it should. Yes, it should. But like, to give an example, can I say to you, I've designated that in game weeks 3 to 5, I'm not going to make any transfers, and in game week 6, I'm going to go mad? Nah, because I haven't come to decision 1 yet. And I think largely, a key point, we did a podcast on it that's worth listening back to, not this week, the week before. It was the People's Poll podcast, I think. And we covered 5 transfers and what would change. And I think a key point I put across then is, I think you'll see more benefit to it in the second half of the season. Because I think in the first half of the season, to go back to sort of like Andrew's question, I don't think people can escape that need and desire to increase value in their squads. Shit, I want him and he's going up. I've got to act. And so the best laid plans of, I'm going to roll in this week, goes. So I think the value importance of the first half of the season will have an impact where it's not so much of a thing. It might become a thing over the sort of period where all the biggest teams have difficult fixtures together. Like I said, maybe ease off a little bit there and then go and attack December. I think that's the first time you're going to really see it sort of making an impact is possibly sort of December, actually, really. So, but yeah, there'll be some use for it later on, no doubt. It will help me around blanks and doubles stuff, you would think. Danelia says, which 4.5 mid and 4 million goalkeepers would you recommend for long term? Thanks. Don't know if I can give you those answers. Look, long term, I would much prefer the upside of a Lucas Bergvall, who may break into the Tottenham team. He's regularly, I think, going to at least get off the bench for you and get you 1-pointers. And if that's all it's going to be, you can sit as your third sub. And if he breaks into the team, you're looking at a potential little bit of dynamite where you're going to want to sit him as first sub. So I really prefer that. The 4.0 goalkeeper of favour at this moment is Paulson at Bournemouth, because as it stands, he's the only one that I look at and think, yeah, you might have a chance to start in game week 1, and we haven't got the information as yet to know if that's a possibility or not. And it's more unlikely than likely. But I'm looking at the 4.0s and going, who's got the best chance? Now, between now and the start of the season, guess what? Someone might get injured and it just goes, shit, it's that one. I wouldn't put too much brain thought into it. Sam Vime says, what do you think of Mincer? I've covered him already. Crozier Dewberry, I cannot comment on at all, Sam. I would be absolutely blagging you. The honest answer is I'm not even certain that's a real player, but I do feel like that's a player that I saw looking at players who were involved for Brighton over the last couple of days. I can't give you anything on him, mate. I would be blagging, so I'm not going to attempt to. Zane FX says, on that answer then, do you think Daniel Levy will hold you back then if you can't bid 80, 90 million for a player like the other big clubs? We can. I think the problem is Tottenham need to do it. Here's the thing. These transfers are potentially, if you think about it like this. So at this moment, and the rules are going to change, remember, probably from next summer, right? But certainly for this year, it's still in place. So at the moment, you can only make a 105 million loss over 3 years. Right. So if Tottenham spend 80 to 90 million pounds on one player, okay, careful. Now, Tottenham as an operating with the money that comes in from the stadium, gets good endorsements, etc. It's competitive with the rest of the greedy six, if you will, but not at the top end of that. It's fine. Can Tottenham spend 89, 90 million on a player? Sure. The problem is, if Tottenham want to spend it on that sort of player, the trouble is, so do probably Arsenal, so do Man City, so do Liverpool. They'll also want that same type of player, right? Because there's not many transfers at that value. So the chance of Tottenham getting a player at 80, 90 million that isn't sold on higher wages, for example, another club, yeah, I think when Tottenham first do that deal at that sort of value, and it might not be for 3-4 years, it'll probably be something. It will be like, here we go, and you didn't even know it was linked. Because I think Tottenham will be so nervous about getting involved in conversations about that sort of money where they know like a Man City could just step in. And my thought always with Tottenham is, like, say if Tottenham are interested in Eze, I know Man City have been linked as well. My thoughts would be, as much as I'd love to have Eze, like if Man City want him, just walk away. Just walk away and save yourself the trouble, because that's where he's going. So that's one of the things that holds Tottenham back. Now, if Tottenham have got the Champions League football there, that's their position then to really do it. And I think that's been the frustration from Tottenham circles in the past, is like, you're in there, capitalise. It's part why it's important that obviously we get back in it. Then it might change. Shout out to FPL Sparta saying all right to all. Daniel Cullerton says, where is Dele Alli at the moment? Is he still at Everton or back at Spurs, mate? As far as I'm aware, he's training with Everton. I see this nostalgic idea of some Tottenham fans wanting it back. I don't think that would be the right move for Tottenham or Dele. I think Dele needs freshness in his life and needs to look forward rather than looking backwards. Hopefully Everton... The problem is Everton need to find an arrangement with Tottenham where basically if he makes a couple more appearances, Everton need to give Tottenham about £10 million. That's the problem. And I know Everton supposedly have been in talks with Tottenham to try and get that fee lessened so that potentially can re-sign him. But I think my understanding is he's training with Everton at the moment. Gazman says, hi James, thoughts on a bench boost game week 1, free hit in 2. If I like my game week 1 team going forward, be getting Haaland in 7 but not missing 2 at the same time. Don't free hit for one player. That's all I'd say. If you're free hitting, it's going to be, right, I can get 3 Manchester City players. I'm going to free hit because I don't want Man City players, and I can go Vardiol, Foden, Haaland as an example, and you want to attack in the 2 other teams. But I would ask you, from the big clubs, what else are you attacking in game week 2? If you're attacking Chelsea, you're going to attack that afterwards anyway. So if you're doing it solely on a Haaland/Manchester City purpose, my answer to that would be I don't like it personally. But play it your way, obviously. Almost Seko says, hi James, Palmer and Watkins are currently the 2 most selected players. Now we shouldn't stare at ownership too much, but do you think based on that it's too risky to start without either? Do you remember 3 years ago, Luke Shaw's ownership going into game week 1? Anyone remember that? Didn't it hit like near 60%? And a lot of us got hit by that fear. Now, comparing Palmer Watkins to Luke Shaw is, I get it, is a completely different beast and animal. But people would, United had good run of fixtures. People were worried that they were going to have to chase it. And it did nothing, obviously. So there is a massive influence on the ownership of these players because of playing for England at Euros. It's massive. I do believe that Palmer, Watkins, pretty much all the England players that you could say did well in the tournament. There is an inflation on their ownership because they are, I know him, I can afford him, rare. So don't think their ownership in terms of what will end up as live is quite as big as what it looks. It's worth saying. Those players aren't going to be captain in game week 1. Let's be realistic about that. Not by the majority of us anyway. It's not criticism of either player. It's just I think we know there are better choices for game week 1 specifically. I think that also applies for the 2 players in game week 2. I think in game week 3 there will be a case for Cole Palmer certainly, looking at the fixtures that week. But is it really better than Haaland going to West Ham? Salah historically has certainly burnt me at Old Trafford before. I've currently penciled to be captain Isak against Tottenham. 10 goals in that fixture in the last 2 games for Newcastle. We know we'll give up chances. I think Isak is probably the best centre-forward finisher in the league, arguably. So, no. And also, you're not going to get the E word off of me, mate. Callum Grant says, what do you think of Havertz over Saka for Arsenal cover? At the moment, Callum, generally in favour. Jose, thanks for tagging in your responses. It's very much appreciated. J3F says, any thoughts about Morgan Rogers? Yeah, one to keep an eye on. I just mentioned that he was probably the one at 5 million who I kind of really had my eye on. Chances are I'd rather end up with a 4.5 or fourth midfielder's going to be at a higher price, personally. But yeah, one absolutely on radar. The very interesting one at that price point, I would suggest. Carlos Bamba says, Jota has now joined Liverpool for pre-season trains and might be a consideration now. So that's fair, yeah. So Jota should be ahead of the other 3. So yeah, that's a fair point. So I guess he's the more likely of the 4 attacking returnees. So, okay. Yeah, let's... I'm interested to see where he might be positioned over the next week or so. It probably wouldn't be involved this weekend, but yeah, thinking about that in retrospect, that's a very fair point, and he would be the most likely starter because obviously Portugal went out the quarter-final stage. So there's a chance he's going to be a week ahead of the others. That's quite important when Liverpool are going to be short in that area. Hemdog, you're very welcome. Harry Baker says, hi James, I have to say I'm puzzled by lack of Solanke across pretty much all content creator drafts. 19 goals last season, nailed pens, 3 decent first 3 fixtures too. He's been in every draft for me. I can understand that. I think the problem is if you look at Bournemouth's fixtures over, say, the first 5, where Newcastle, Chelsea, the first 2 home games have got, and then there's a trip to Liverpool in 5, like it doesn't smell great. Now, opening day is Forest away, and he scored a hat-trick in that fixture last season. And then I remember how bloody popular it felt like everybody needed him before the return fixture against Forest, and he blanked, if you remember. So Dominic Solanke would be very much under consideration for me if I went for the bench boost 1 strategy, actually. Just based on him having a good feeling of playing at that stadium again. I could see that. But if I'm looking at it across that opening start, nah, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Him as an asset at that price, great. If you want to use him as a set and forget player and you're looking at your longer term for wildcard, sort of, I want a wildcard in December and stuff, then by all means go with someone like Dominic Solanke. I think that's great. I'd compare that to, I mentioned Jared Bowen. I mean, it's a good comparison. Different positions, but it's same. I use Jared Bowen in reference to, like, if I'm going to wildcard in December, someone like Jared Bowen is more consistent, is more of an option for me, who again would be in hardly anyone's drafts at the moment. Really difficult set of fixtures at the start, quite similar to Bournemouth's, and actually probably a little bit worse. But look at as a sponge and go, I know exactly what you are for consistency. I'll take you and I'll trust you. And if that's how you feel about Solanke, I have absolutely no problem with that, Harry. You crack on, mate. Never be put off, if you feel something strongly about it, never be put off by, content creators aren't talking about Solanke or something. For me, looking into game week 1, I would find him difficult to pick against Havertz, Watkins and Isak personally, and you're factoring Haaland into this. If I factor Haaland into this, I need to think about enablers like Adam Armstrong. Solanke's not going to do it for me. And also, I think the real reason why you're talking about Solanke as a kind of like a sponge, a longer term pick of consistency, well, actually, when you look at the first 2 weeks, that's what everyone's doing with Watkins. Because no one really wants to look at Watkins against Arsenal in game week 2. So that's what people are doing with Watkins. So you don't want to do it with Solanke as well. So I think that's why he's not getting a lot of attention. You like him, Harry, you crack on. I really rate Dominic Solanke. Just a small caveat that he's a very good forward, and it's not improbable that there might be some interest in him during the window. And look, if he did move, is it going to be a couple of weeks before he then plays for his next club or something? I'm sure you can act upon that if it happens. Like I would say Solanke is way more of interest to me than Toney right now. Let me put it in perspective like that for you. If Isak got injured, to go back to a point earlier, Solanke suddenly will get talked about. Same with if it's Watkins. Sam Vimes says, Dunk fits Hertzler's ball-playing set-piece defenders and he's our captain. Would be very brave to drop him. It would put half the fan base against him immediately and we have a hard start. Yeah, the ball-playing aspect with Lewis Dunk is not a concern whatsoever. The concern is, ideally, his system is 3-4-3. But in possession, so him at the heart of that, when it goes kind of 5-4-1 off the ball, Lewis Dunk, absolutely ideal. In terms of build-up, you'd think great, but I've got real concerns about it because from what I've looked at, he wants to move his centre-back into midfield. Now, I don't, as good as I think Dunk is as a ball player, if you're asking him suddenly to receive the ball back to goal off of his centre-backs, I don't know if that's comfortable. So therefore, I think it might even be more suitable to Van Heck in terms of receiving it in that area. And I think you might have seen it didn't go well, but De Zerbi did that certainly in at least one fixture last year. I remember at Fulham where he put Van Heck into midfield. So he himself thought, yeah, Van Heck into that position. So I can see Van Heck possibly being the one that would step out from central. Now, can Lewis Dunk play as the left-sided centre-back or the right-sided centre-back? Therefore, of course he can. But guess what? He's going to end up really wide because of the split. And I think there's a concern there that he just actually profile-wise might not be what we think. I would certainly say, Sam, if you're saying, does Lewis Dunk play regularly for Hertzler's Brighton? I'm going to say to you, yeah, about 80%, mate. But the question earlier was like, nailed. And I wouldn't put him in that line at the moment, actually. I'm interested in it. David Fawn says, hi, James. What are your thoughts on having Raya over Gabriel? Feels safer for minutes with Timber and Calafiori. Gabriel was benched for Timber early last season before Timber got the injury. Yeah, here's my take on this. I think particularly with the early fixtures. I think I had a draft a couple of weeks ago and Raya was in it. And the more I thought about it, I should waste. You know what he is? He's the I need Arsenal coverage. That's what he is. You don't want David Raya as your 5 point. You want David Raya as Arsenal coverage. So that's why he's in. You're forgetting about the other goalkeepers. David Raya probably, even if Arsenal keep the most clean sheet, probably will. As you've seen last year, Jordan Pickford still finished above him in terms of points, right? I don't think that's particularly going to change. So even with potentially having the most clean sheets, he doesn't guarantee you being the best scoring goalkeeper. So forget the I want Arsenal coverage, and I get that because I thought similar. You need to compare him to other goalkeepers. And if that means you don't have Arsenal coverage, don't have Arsenal coverage. Particularly on that period where 2 to 5, clearly there's 3 really tough Arsenal away games. And as covered several times on this pod, Brighton at home is not going to be, there's a guaranteed clean sheet for you. So rather than going with Ray, I'd just rather you start about Arsenal. And that's actually probably the way that I'm leaning. I see someone like Porro as a potential holder, maybe. But I think, I might be starting without Arsenal defensive. I think if I'd start one at the moment, it's probably Saliba. But I think I can come back to it, I think it's come back to it from 6. Once you hit game week 6, there's then a real run where you're going to want real good Arsenal coverage, not just defensively, but offensively. But I think the conclusion for me at the moment is probably start without. And if I had to, it'd be Saliba, I think. The goalkeeper that I've thought about a lot more this week, I would tell you, is Nick Pope. Matt Maher says, hi, James. Everyone seems to be Hudson-Odoi over Elanga. What's the reasoning? End of last season, mate. Very much as simple as that, Matt. It's on the end of last season. I think we had a period sort of going into game week 29 where there was a real debate about those two. I mean, it was clearly Hudson-Odoi over Elanga in the run-in, so I think it's as simple as that, Matt. Sam Vimes says Elanga was on the bench in last season, maybe Wyatt. There we go. Harry Baker says, thanks so much for a detailed response, mate, on Solanke. You're very welcome. Greg Frost says, I'm expecting Toney to turn up at White Hart Lane at the end of game week 3. Good luck all. You mean signed for Tottenham? I did hear some rumours last night, but I think there's a lot of wild Tottenham rumours going on at the moment, and most of it I laugh at. I think to go back to the point on Tottenham signing a player for like 80, 90 million, Toney, I think if that's who Tottenham want, Tottenham again would have a real awareness that there's a player going into last year of his contract. Brentford are not a football club that get bullied. They'll have a price valuation, whatever that is at the moment, if people don't meet it. And I think they know that the closer it gets towards the end of the month, Brentford are going to need to make a decision quite clearly, right? Otherwise, Toney in January can obviously talk to foreign clubs legally, and he can sign a pre-contract and leave for free. And it's do Brentford want to take that chance? But I think from Tottenham's perspective, Tottenham did want Toney. The strategy might be similar. It might be wait. And the reason for that is, again, do you want to get into a situation where it's like Chelsea will go silly here or Arsenal will go silly here? Tottenham don't want to get in those wars with the other clubs just yet, I don't think. Not while they're not in the Champions League. And I think saying that Chelsea are in the Champions League, yeah, but I think even Chelsea fans will tell you there's erraticness happening there. That if Chelsea suddenly went, no, I want that player, we saw it with like Caicedo last year, right? So Tottenham don't want to get involved in that sort of thing. So it might be that Tottenham's strategy is to wait and maybe no one else wants him. It might be everyone else's strategy. Personally, I don't think Toney is the best fit. I actually would prefer Tottenham got Solanke. I think would be a better fit for Tottenham than Toney. But also I recognise because of the contract situation, more expensive. Michael Scott will be the last one I will cover. But I'll cover first. Greg Frost says it will be a deadline day jobby. Yeah, on Toney. And Nans Mukherjee says, an Arsenal fan, I find it so funny. I love listening to a Spurs fan more than anything else. It's the best FPL show. I very much appreciate that, mate. Thank you very much. Michael Scott says, who would need to drop to the bench for Bergvall to start? Just Pap Sarr, I think. That's it, yeah. I think so. So, Maddison is obviously highly likely to start, but I think, you know, we saw Ange not starting, was it Chelsea and Liverpool at the end of last season, but there's at least one, and that was way overdue because he wasn't playing well at all. But Maddison, with a proper pre-season now, remember he was coming back from injury, should start as the 10. Bergvall is ideal for the kind of 8-10 hybrid position that can also drop in as a 6. That's the one that's got to do the most work, and Pap Sarr is incredible at the work, the off the ball stuff in that position. Pap Sarr is really beneficial, I feel, for Pedro Porro as well. But Bergvall can be as well, because Bergvall's got that eye for the pass. So he's probably in competition there really with Sarr, Bentancur, and to a little bit of an extent Kulusevski as well, because Kulusevski was seen a little bit more in that role, and actually Kulusevski has largely played that role as well so far in pre-season. So he's competing with 3 other players there. Once he gets in, you won't take him back out, I don't think. I really think, and listen, if you can take it as fandom and excited, young player and all that, as I said to Clates just on earlier this week, I just think Lucas Bergvall has it. And he's going to be an absolutely super player for Tottenham. Right, that's it. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much to everybody who contributed in the chat. Smash a like, hit the sub button on your way out. Just clarify a couple of bits before I finish off. As to repeat, obviously you can join us on Patreon from July the 30th. That's this coming Tuesday. If you want additional content or if you just want to support the show, we'd be very grateful. Every little bit of Planet FPL content that you watch, be it on YouTube or listen to on audio, you owe a little bit of thanks to the patrons, because I promise you genuinely, they do not happen anymore without the support that they give us. So if you just want to do it from a support perspective, it's very much appreciated. If you want additional content, you can join obviously our Slack community from Basic Plus. If you just want to kind of essentially buy us a coffee a month, join us at Basic tier. Intermediate Plus tier, you get an additional 5 podcasts every weekday, Monday to Friday, pretty much throughout the season. I might take one of the weeks off during an international break this season, possibly. And at Advanced tier, you get additional video content from myself and the opportunity to join me on a Zoom call every week as well. In fact, my Advanced tier Zoom call this week is at 9 p.m. this evening. But we still have plenty for all of you if you don't support us on Patreon. As said, correspondent week. will kick off for you at 8 a.m. on Friday, August the 5th, with Adam Pritchard on Arsenal. That will be followed at 1 p.m. for you by Paul Gore-Allen on Ipswich Town. At 6 p.m. you will have Tom Med on Brentford, and at 11 p.m. you will have Chris Stone on West Ham United. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the 4 days of what's there, because it'll all become clear over the next week or so, but you get the picture. 8, 1, 6, 11 podcasts available to all of you, Monday to Friday, 5th to the 9th for correspondent week. And then the build up to game week 1, we'll have 4 extended specials for you. On the, what's the opening, the 12th, will be a podcast we're going to title The Shortlist, which is essentially taking all the information we've got from correspondent week, adding the information we learned from the final pre-season friendlies, and kind of whittling down to this is who we're interested in for the end. On the Tuesday the 13th, I will do Chip Strategy podcast for you. Wednesday the 14th, we will look at captaincy for opening weeks, and we'll also look at rotation pairings for you. On Thursday the 15th, we will open up for a really big Q&A that'll be open to everybody. Keep an eye on Twitter for that. And on Friday the 16th, shorter podcast in the morning. I certainly, at least me, and most likely someone that joins me, will go through our intended final drafts, which will obviously be subject to team news on the Friday and Let's Talk FPL getting information that Gabriel is a doubt for Arsenal just ahead of deadline. And obviously I will do a game week 1 deadline stream exclusively on YouTube that will be at 5:30 p.m. UK time on Friday the 16th of August. That's probably worth smashing a like. It's maybe worth hitting the sub button. It's maybe worth that 5-star review on the audio platforms. Again, if you can or wish to support the show, it's www.patreon.com/Planet FPL. But otherwise, guys, have a great week or so. As ever, happy tinkering, be nice to each other, play it your way. See you on correspondent week, Monday, August the 5th. For the benefit of those on the audio, cue music, please, Mansholt.